This is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi. Here now, Tony Bruschi. This is Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi.
That it is, and we are jumping into the world of Ellen Greenberg again today because, well, more things have happened in this case in the last 2 weeks and in the last 14 years. Thankfully, because of the persistence of Ellen's parents saying, we're not going to take this, we're not going to buy your story, we're not just going to go away quietly because she wasn't didn't kill herself, she was murdered. The evidence is all there. There's no question about this. And finally, in this last week, one of the medical professionals in it actually walked back their ruling, saying, "Yeah, you know what? This was something other than suicide." Joining me to discuss, someone who's been on this case from the beginning, Jennifer Coffindaffer, retired FBI special agent. There's that, and there's also some other interesting information that has come about this week involving the man who was the security guard at the building, but we will get to that. Let me just get your reactions at this point with all of these new things that have come into this case and the investigation being reopened. What's your thoughts? What's your evaluation where we stand right now?
Well, we are in a very positive space from the standpoint of there's been a very serious turning point. Anytime you have a medical examiner who they never change their mind, almost never.
Mm-hmm.
And he has changed his mind. And this is obviously a very high publicized case. It's a case that's so important. And to say for a third time, a change, right?
Mm-hmm.
Homicide, no suicide. No, now we're back to unknown but not suicide. Is really unheard of, Tony. And just imagine how this affects his standing in terms of being an expert on the stand.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently, when he's been on the stand in the past, and I just learned this, they have actually held up pictures to the juries where he has been testifying and said, "This is the same guy who ruled this a suicide." So, he's looking at the full picture, I think, to try to make himself credible. But it really, no matter what he does, he's not credible, in my opinion, at this point.
No, not credible, but I guess the question is why? Why is he not credible? Is it because he made a bad call, or was there something that made him make a bad call? That's kind of the question that I think most people have. Was he that incompetent? Or is there a reason for this that have been switched originally from suicide to homicide?
Well, two-edged sword there, I think, Tony. First, number one, yes, there was a reason why he says he changed from homicide to suicide initially. He said, listen, the police came to me, there was this closed door meeting that we've all heard about, and they let him know that no one else was in there. The door was locked. The fiancé was outside. He had to break in the door. And so by the mere fact that nobody else was in there, it had to have been her. And that's what made him switch. But on its face, that's so unusual for somebody who is in the practice of practicing medicine as a pathologist, is going to just look away from the medical evidence and say, oh, I'm making this determination based on what the police told me about somebody being there or not being there. So that's why the original change was made.
I've never heard of a medical examiner making their ruling on what the cause of death is based on hearsay and not on the physical evidence of a person that has post-mortem stab wounds and wounds that went into the spine, which would also have made it impossible for her to continue on forward because, the fiancé said the doorman was there. Must be true, must be suicide. I mean, what the hell is that? That is not a reason to make that ruling. I do not buy for 1 second that is the only reason he changed that ruling. There has to be something else at play here, does there not?
Well, I think the mere fact that there was this meeting that took place with multiple individuals, and that after that meeting, all of a sudden the change happened, it really makes you just call into question. Because he should have known that information well early on. And quite frankly, his medical finding at the beginning, he was so specific and said she was stabbed by someone.
Mm-hmm.
He was very specific. And quite frankly, you don't have to have a degree, I would argue, to see that.
Yeah.
As you mentioned, not only into the spinal column, also 3 inches into that neck, that huge gaping wound on the head, and then also penetrated the aorta and penetrated the internal organs clear to the liver. So, how does that make sense? How can you make that many wounds and keep stabbing away?
You can't. And you also can't come back from the dead and stab yourself as well for post-mortem stab wounds. Because if we're to believe the story as is, she'd have to be a zombie for this to have been pulled off correctly. If we are to believe that she stabbed herself after death, after she had already, if she killed herself, damaged all these things that would disable her from being able to actually stab herself. Tell me more about that meeting that took place and what you're aware there, where suddenly they came back and this is a homicide and oh, it's not a crime scene either. Go figure.
Well, the issue I definitely want to talk on this crime scene because what happened was the apartment manager called and said to the police, "Can we clear? Is this crime scene clear?" And the law enforcement authorities said, "Yeah, you can do whatever you want to it." A professional cleaning crew, Tony, was called in, not like maids or us, but a hazmat crew that specializes in crime scene cleanup went into that apartment and erased all evidence of anything, whatever happened,
Yeah,
blood spatter,
wiped it.
everything gone. That was monumental. And then days later, finally, law enforcement achieved getting a search warrant, but it was too late. Everything was already wiped. And most importantly, Tony, the night of this incident, the Sam, who was the fiance, called his uncle, who is a prominent judge and an ethics judge, by the way, came to the apartment and took all her devices.
How often does that happen? How often do you call your prominent ethics judge uncle and say, hey, my fiance's dead in my house? They said it's not a crime scene. Can you come take all of the digital footprints out of the house? I got the cleaners coming already.
Yeah, it's really jaw-dropping, and specifically because part of the reason that they're saying, meaning they, law enforcement, Shapiro, everybody who has said this is suicide, has talked about searches and other items that I guess they found on this digital on the computer. And my point is that has been completely compromised
Yeah.
because it was in the hands of the uncle.
Yeah, I mean the chain of custody is completely broken. I mean, I'm not saying, I know you're not saying, and nobody's saying that they went in and deleted things, but the potential was certainly there to have done so. And I guess the question is now, where is all of this digital evidence? What happened to all of it? What happened to the knife that was never printed when there's no DNA also taken off of anything? Are all of these pieces of evidence gone?
No, as far as we know, they're being maintained still, which has been a huge issue for the Greenbergs. In
Hmm.
other words, in Pennsylvania, suicide is not a crime. So it's not a crime. So why didn't they release it very early on after they said it was a suicide? I mean, this was 2011. The Greenbergs don't even have her pocketbook.
Yeah.
They don't have her journal. They don't have any of this evidence to peruse. And so obviously they're quite frustrated. They have hired so many different pathologists. They even hired the great Cyril Wecht, who came out and said this is most probably a homicide, not a suicide,
Hmm.
in a memo that I read. And so essentially, they're working without a lot of the evidence. And why did the state feel compelled to keep it? I should say the Commonwealth County. Why?
How come none of that was brought into discovery in these civil cases? I mean, could that not have been brought up, brought into this? I mean, there are key pieces to this case.
Oh, definitely. And that civil suit was brilliant because the civil suit the Greenbergs filed that finally went to trial on Monday, just this last Monday. Well, I say went to trial, it was halted very quickly because the guess what? The ME's office, who they were suing, and the ME, Dr. Osborne, they quickly wanted to make a deal. They did not want to let all of this evidence and information get out into the public eye. And certainly they have been able to obtain a lot of evidence during their examination in preparation for their civil suit, but they still don't have a lot of it, Tony. And it's just really incomprehensible what they've been through.
Want more on this case and others? Then press subscribe now and don't miss a moment of true crime coverage from Tony Bruschi and the Hidden Killers podcast.